All right, welcome to our next installment of drawing class. And this next bit of the exercise that we're going to do is going to be to make an enlargement of the picture you've been working with. So we need to start with making a double-sized grid. Okay, so how we're going to do this, you're going to take a sheet in your 24 by 18 inch drawing pad, your large drawing pad. And I've torn it out to put it on the wall here. You don't have to tear it out. But if your study piece is horizontal, you're going to want to do this horizontal, but you could just as easily do this vertically. And what we want to do is we want to make a grid that is corresponding to the grids we've been using before, only this time with 2-inch blocks instead of 1-inch blocks. It's a fairly simple part of our exercise right now. All right, so what I want you to do to make sure it gets centered on the page, we're going to measure down 1 inch from the top. Make a couple of marks. We're going to measure in 1 inch from the left-hand side. And if you have a long ruler or a meter stick or a yardstick, that's going to be very helpful for this assignment. If you don't, though, you'll have to do this in a couple of lines across here. All right, so we have just in from the top and the left, we have our starting point. And but now we're going to measure 2 inches to make little marks every 2 inches to have the same number that we had before. So I'm going to say and just for the sake of clarity, I'm going to put my letters across here, A, that's how many I had. I had J, and remember, we'll figure out how to make that one smaller. Okay, and then we go down the side, same way. And we want to make marks along this edge as well. And a set of marks along the bottom, again, to make sure that the lines you draw will be straight. Okay. Oh, something very important to mention. I'm using a very, very dark charcoal pencil for this exercise. You should use a light pencil. I'm using this dark charcoal because I want it to show up good on the video. But when you do this, use a light pencil. Don't make dark lines, because eventually with this project, this has many stages, and we're going to want to try to make these grid lines disappear for the final product. So don't make them dark like I'm making them. Make them nice and light. Make them so you can see them, but so that they're not too obvious. Now, this column labeled I was the last complete 1-inch block in my drawing. And the very last column, which was J, was only 3/4 of an inch. So this will require a little bit of math. So we're doubling everything. So if the last column in our original grid was a 3/4 of an inch, then this last column really needs to be 1.5 inches, which is twice 3/4. So that's a little bit of tricky math. It's not too tricky, but at any rate. Then we'll go across, and we had rows that were down to 8. We had 8 rows, but the bottom row was very, very small. So maybe I'll fix that now. The bottom row was only 1/2 inch. So double 1/2 inch would be 1 inch. So my last row, I'm going to make just 1 inch. And then we'll go across. All right, so that's the first step, and there are several steps to this part of the exercise, but now we have a grid that is twice as big as the other grids we've made, but it has the same number of blocks, and the narrow blocks are still narrow, and that's phase 1 complete. Okay, so now here we'll do phase 2 of this video. And what we're going to do is I'm going to have you go back to your original picture that you gridded off. And remember, we've kept 1 copy of this clean with no drawing on it, and we're going to keep drawing on this one a little bit more. And what I'm going to do is, this is going to call upon you to do a little bit of analytical observation, is just going to follow the contours of the major difference between light and dark. So we're not trying to copy everything. We're not trying to trace every edge. We're just trying to draw a line around the biggest dark masses. So just kind of a blobby mass. So that'll probably be easier to show you. So I'm going to use this red marker, which I think and I hope will show up well. So for example, this bird over here, the tail is very dark, but I'm not following every feather. I'm just going kind of around it, all the darkness of the bird, maybe around the head, maybe this leaf coming up here. So just a shape like that. And I'm going to follow this branch coming up here, go around that. In fact, I'm not really following the edges of the objects. I'm following the edges of where the darkness is, where there's a clear distinction between light and dark. And this is, again, something you're going to have to judge for yourself. And you don't have to maybe get everything but okay. So I think that kind of does it. And that's phase two. All right. So for phase three of this project, what we're going to do is we're going to use the grid, and notice how these lines I've drawn move from one square into another square, and we're going to note where those lines cross the grid lines and how they interrupt the grid blocks. And we're going to use that to transfer these lines we've drawn on the gridded photograph over to the enlarged paper. And you'll see that as I show you in the example. And again, you're just going to sort of follow the general lines. These are not exact necessarily, but they follow the basic contour. I mean, you can be as exact as you like, but what I really want is these big shapes transferred over to the large grid. And I'll work on that a bit, and then I'll show you the final phase. Okay. Okay, so we see that we have basically an outline of the general shapes. You know, I always say in class, always work from general to specific. So we're not trying to be too super detailed yet. We're just trying to make big outline shapes of where the darks are and where the lights are. Again, I did this much darker than you ought to do it. Make your shapes with a lighter touch. Do them with charcoal, but do them more lightly than I've done them. Because the next step, and this will be the final step for this portion, is to fill in the dark areas. But don't fill them in dark, dark, dark. Fill them in sort of a little bit less than medium. Let's say if you had that 12-tone grayscale, make them like a 4. Now again, I'm going to fill these in, and they'll probably be a little darker just so they show up on video. But that'll be the final thing. So you just make all the dark areas a sort of a slightly lighter than medium tone. Okay. Okay, so this is the final form of this for this stage of our of the exercise. This is kind of the generalized abstract patterning of the lights and darks in the picture. So the takeaway for this exercise really is for you to understand that even in a realistic painting, even in a realistic image, there is an abstract patterning of where the lights and darks are. And to become a better and better drawer, you want to be aware of those things, not just where objects are, not thinking object, 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 where is this object, where is that object, but what is the pattern of light and dark that I'm creating, so we can see it that way. And this exercise is to try to get you to see the abstract patterning of the light, general lights and darks in the composition. And so ideally, you will have you need to do this in charcoal. Ideally, your grid lines would be lighter than this because I made them very dark so you could see them. It'd be great if you didn't really have a sense of dark outlines around the gray shapes, but just gray shapes would be perfect. We're going to do more with this. This is not the last thing we're doing in this exercise, but this is the state that we want this in for now. And we'll call this the sort of general enlargement. This is the general enlargement of the picture. And I'll be asking for you to submit pictures of this phase of the exercise coming up in a few days. Okay, that's all. Take care.